I emerged from the portal into a strange fungal forest, greeted immediately by dozens of towering cyan mushrooms. Awash with relief, I took a few moments to look around, knowing that the warped forest was the safest of the nether biomes. There wasn't a lot in the immediate area, mostly just the warped fungus and nylium. I made an attempt to mark my coordinates in the chat, but for some reason the chat wasn't working, so I started wandering around instead. A bit nervous to go out and explore, I instead focused on gathering materials near the portal, mostly just quartz since I would need it later for a few redstone farms. After looping around to the spawn area, I finally gathered up the courage to head out and do some exploring in the rest of the nether. I knew I was only looking for soul sand, so I wasn't planning to go to a fortress yet or anything. What was the worst that could happen? I didn't get very far before I started hearing skeleton sounds, which was a bit off-putting since skeletons only spawn in soul sand valleys. I figured that meant I was close, so I decided to turn on subtitles to see which direction the sounds had come from. It was thanks to the subtitles that I noticed the sounds weren't just any skeleton sounds. They were wither skeleton sounds. That meant I was near a fortress. I emerged from a hole directly above the fortress and immediately decided I was going to make a staircase down. I didn't want to get attacked and not have anywhere to go. What followed was, frankly, an embarrassing attempt at gathering blaze rods. Before long, I ended up retreating into my staircase after only getting a single rod. I marked down the coordinates on a sheet of paper, and then I doubled back towards the portal. I realized that I was actually a lot closer to the portal than I thought, so I decided to make myself a little tunnel straight to the fortress. It worked a little better than the staircase, allowing me to strike at the Blaze's feet, or rods, or whatever Blazes have down there? I don't know, it's kind of just airspace. Anyways, between getting caught on fire and the large amounts of damage I was taking, I ultimately decided that fortress raiding would be best left to another time. I left the fortress with 2 rods in hand and decided to keep exploring the nether. There wasn't much of note for a while as I continued making my way through the warped forest, but I did eventually come across a nether wastes. My first thought was of the chances I'd have to do some piglin bartering, but I quickly remembered that I would need gold for that. Gold I didn't have. Gold that... Wait, I'm not wearing any gold either! I turned around just as fast as I'd entered the biome, immediately going to search for some nether gold. I found some almost immediately and quickly made myself a pair of boots, saving the rest just in case I came across any piglins to barter with. Eventually, my journey brought me back to the wastes above a massive ocean of lava. While looking down at the threat of death from below, I noticed a little soul sand beach and hurried over, being careful to avoid the ghast above. I hopped down like an absolute hero and perfectly landed the clutch. Then I immediately gathered over half a stack of soul sand. Not wanting to be greedy, I immediately made my way back up, and I started heading back towards the portal. There wasn't much of interest on the way back. I killed an enderman and got pearl, and I almost died to a lava jump scare, but that was about it. Oh, and I did actually land a clutch with the twisting vines as well, so... redemption? Anyways, I made it safely back to the portal and proudly went through with my soul sand and my bonus blaze rods. Once I got back home, I cleared my inventory and resorted my chests. I knew there was one more material that I needed before I could finish my spawner build, and it was actually one that I'd completely forgotten about before. Technically, it wasn't actually necessary for the build, but it would make it a million times easier. You see, in order to make a bubble vader for the zombies, the entire elevator needs to be water source blocks. I couldn't just put water at the top and let it flow down. That meant I either had to fill and dump water buckets over and over and over again to fill up the entire tube, or I could just use some kelp instead. I'm not really sure why it works that way, but kelp converts any water it touches into a source block, so it was definitely the easier option. I knew for certain that there was an ocean not far out of the way, so I decided I would take a little boaty jaunt out to get some. Little did I know this trip would lead me to a horrible crime scene. Yes, while I rowed my boat, I made the mistake of turning my eyes into the woods and I witnessed a murder. Nature is a cruel mistress. The rest of my journey was mostly uneventful, and I made it to the ocean without witnessing any other bloody messes. In just a single dive, I was able to gather a little over 2 stacks of kelp, likely more than I would ever need. While I was in the area, I also decided to head over to the jungle and grab some jungle wood since I only grabbed bamboo before. Like with the acacia last time, I had no plans for the jungle wood, but it would still be good to have just in case. I also found another ruined portal with 2 gold blocks, more to trade with when I went back to the Nether. On the way home though, I realized I made a slight miscalculation, as night was about to fall as I ran back through the woods. By this late in the game, I had enough skill to weave my way around zombie claws and skeleton arrows, but the wolves I encountered earlier weren't so lucky. Against my better judgment, I decided to give them a hand. Murderers though they were, they did only as Mother Nature instructed them. One skeleton was no match for the three of us, but another soon joined, followed by a spider and a creeper, and I regret to admit it, but one of the wolves didn't make it out alive. When the battle was won, I turned my eyes to the poor lonely wolf left after the attack, and I offered her a bone. She accepted gleefully, deciding to join me on my adventure, and who was I to deny her after being unable to save her partner? Out of respect, I made sure to repair the damage our battle had caused, and then my new wolf companion and I hurried back home. I let myself fall onto my bed, and my new companion joined me as we slept away the night. I decided that it would be best to allow her to stay here, and so I gave her a few pets and allowed her to sit in my bed while I went to work on clearing my area of monsters. As I fought a creeper on my path, a skeleton shot at me from the cover of a nearby tree. It was here that I saw an opportunity, so I fell back and, with the unwitting help of a sloppy skeleton archer, I got myself the first of several music discs. I gleefully stashed it away, and then gathered my gear and headed to work on the spawner. It took some finagling and a few miscounts here and there, but eventually I did manage to get the bubble vader in place. In addition to the bubble vader, I threw up some quick decorations, spruce pillars and an entrance area, before beginning my first test. And it worked! Then I decided to do some beautification to the area since I would be here a lot. The first thing I did was actually move the dropper over one block for symmetry's sake. Then I completely moved the entrance as well. I knew this would mean I would have to do some terraforming on the surface, but that was fine. Finally, I redid the entire room based on the design I had made in a previous world with Sunny. Enjoy the time-lapse of that. After finishing up the room, I was just a few points of XP away from hitting level 30. Exhausted from the project, I ended up returning home rather than grinding, because, trust me, a lot of these sessions were dedicated to grinding. And I hit level 30 while I was smelting stone for what would be the grinder's entrance. Filled with excitement, I completely forgot what I was doing and ran to my enchanting room. I was a little nervous to enchant my pickaxe, seeing as the base enchantment was only efficiency 4 and not something like a fortune, but I lucked out, and I got a super pick on my first roll. I was very eager to use my new pickaxe, but I had a few things in mind I wanted to do before I started strip mining. First and foremost, I headed over to the entrance of the mob grinder and built a little cave entrance around it. A little stone room with some spruce logs as support. Then I built up a hill around it to make it look less out of place. Next up, I made a little path out of the cave and decided to connect it up with the path to my base. This kind of led me down a rabbit hole of terraforming, and I ended up completely flattening the entire hill between my base and the grinder, and I even accidentally found my first safety hole from day one. I decided to put trapdoors over it and highlight it with some flowers since it was where I got my first set of tools. As I was making the path, I couldn't help but notice my cows penned up at the hobbit hole. As I kept breeding them, the space just kept getting more and more cramped. It wasn't originally intended to be permanent, since I only needed cows to get the enchanter going, and now they were all stuffed in there together and getting no attention. I decided that needed to be amended, so I began planning out an area to build them a barn. Since I had leveled the whole area, I figured I could put it to good use with a barn, so I started gathering oak wood immediately. In between gathering the wood, I swapped over to my creative copy of the world, and I started designing a barn. I didn't need it to be much, just a place for 2 pens, one for cows and one for sheep, and maybe a little bit for some storage. Ultimately, this was the design that I came up with, and I realized after the fact that it was incredibly similar to this one by Smithers Boss. I hadn't intended to copy him, but his video will be linked regardless because, honestly, I think it looks better than mine anyways. Anyways, once I was done building the barn, I switched back over to the main world and continued gathering all the necessary materials. I'm sure it was pretty obvious by now how many times I've said it, but being terrible at math, I somehow managed to double the amount of materials I actually needed. I say somehow like I didn't know how I did it. In reality, I just counted the logs I would need and not how many planks I could convert them into, but it's better to have too much than not enough anyways, right? One thing I will note is that while I was right next to a massive forest and easily could have flattened it to get the materials I needed, I didn't want to destroy the landscape right next to my base, so I was gathering all of the wood from saplings that I had gathered up to this point. Had I gone through the forest, this probably would have taken minutes at most, but there's something more gratifying about grinding out stuff yourself, you know? So, in order to pass the time to let the trees grow, I took a few opportunities to wander around. I gathered some coal from the nearby caves using my new pickaxe, which felt great. I always love the feeling of getting my first enchantments in a world. I also prettied up the entrance to my strip mine, since I knew I'd be using it again pretty soon. And eventually I ended up using bone meal to fast track my wood supply, even composting the extra saplings I got from the trees. In total, the grind took about an hour and a half, which is far from my longest material grind, but still the longest one in this series so far. It actually makes me excited for the bigger builds that we're going to do in the future. Anyways, with the material grind over, I finally began building the barn. With the barn completed, I immediately got to preparations to bring my animals over. With the pen so cramped, I knew I had to thin the herd a bit before transporting them over, so let's just say I turned a few cows into little doves to watch over the new generation. Yeah. Anyways, I led the remaining cows and sheep over to the new barn, and I gave them some time to settle. Then, I added a couple of finishing touches to the build, like a little overhang made from doused campfires, and a cover for the windows, and then finally I connected a path to the base. I also threw some hay bales inside and made sure to feed the animals. Next up came a little bit of beautification. I continued the pathway up to the Nether portal since it was all on its lonesome up on the hill. Then I made a huge crop plot where the original pen had been. I didn't time-lapse it, but here's sped-up footage to build. The west side would grow potatoes, and the east side would grow carrots. I also moved the wheat closer to the animals since I wouldn't be eating it. Then I cleaned up the podzol and I added one more pathway to the strip mine. I finished the little decorating spree by planting a few trees and making sure the grass grew up in areas that I wasn't planning to build in. This is actually where I call it for this section, but I was very eager to get back on. My next objective was getting more diamonds after all. The next day, I was very excited to get back on, but before I did, I wanted to check on the previous video first. When I did, guys, I cannot even begin to describe the amount of joy I was filled with. Now, I've been making videos on and off for more than a decade now, but never have any of my videos done this well in just 2 days. My comments were flooded with so much kindness and love that even now I'm still receiving so much support on that video. I needed to take this time to thank each and every person that watched the video and that left a kind comment for me. I won't ask for you to subscribe or anything like that, but I really appreciate you guys for watching and for all of the kindness that you guys have shown. Oh, and don't worry, Mom, I still haven't killed any pigs. Reinvigorated by the support, I hurried back to keep playing. Like I said before, my next goal was simply to get kitted out. If I was going to tackle the rest of the game, I wanted better armor. Plus, having a sword that increases loot would also be nice. So I packed a few pickaxes, torches, and a shield, and I made my way back to the strip mine. This time, I figured I'd just dig down, no fancy spiral or anything like that, just a straight staircase down to negative 58. Being that it's just strip mining, there wasn't a whole lot to commentate over, so here's a compilation of everything I got while I was mining. I ended up leaving the cave with 39 shiny diamonds. I know they've been altering diamond spawn rates in the recent updates, but even so, I was happy with the results. I wasted no time in getting these diamonds back home and into the crafting table. Helmet. Chestplate. Leggings. And boots. The 4 armor pieces once lived in harmony. but everything changed when the 1.9 update added elytras. Where was I going with this? Anyways, in addition to armor, I had plenty of diamonds left for a sword, an axe, and a shovel as well. That made a full set of both armor and tools, except for the diamond hoe, but we can worry about that later. All that was left now was to enchant. Out of all of them, I went for the axe first, with efficiency 4, and got fortune 3 as a bonus. Normally I wouldn't recommend that on an axe, but with the timber plugin, fortune actually gets me more sapling sticks and apples from trees, so I think it evens out. Then I went down to the grinder to get back to level 30 so I can enchant my sword with sharpness 4, and I got unbreaking 3 as a bonus. Another loop to the grinder got me protection 3 on my chest plate, and I didn't get any bonuses with that one. Now, 3 enchantments in and I was already getting tired of the round trip from the hobbit hole to the grinder and back just for a single roll at enchanting. I decided at this point to just make another enchanter down at the grinder, so I gathered all of my sugarcane and leather, and then I had to grind more for the necessary books, so I'll be right back. While I was getting the items, I did end up reaching level 30 again, so I decided to enchant my helmet with Protection 4, and I got Aqua Affinity and Unbreaking 3 as bonuses. I also remembered one of my extra data packs from a world I had with Sunny was Rotten Flesh to Leather, meaning I could smelt the rotten flesh from the grinder into leather. I thought that felt a little too cheaty though, and I opted to just get the leather from the cows I had already had. Once I had all that I needed, I grabbed my enchanting table and I headed down to the grinder. I spent the next hour grinding to level 30, enchanting a piece of gear, and then re-rolling enchantments until I saw one that I wanted. I also decided to re-roll my chestplate since it only had Protection 3. The enchantments I got were as follows. First on my shovel, I got Efficiency 4 with no bonuses. Next on my chestplate, I got Protection 4 with no bonuses. On my leggings, I got Protection 4 with Unbreaking 3 as a bonus. Finally on my boots, I got Feather Falling 4 with Fire Protection 3 and Depth Strider 4 as bonuses. All in all, the enchantments themselves were nothing too special, and I would have to put in a lot of work if I wanted to fully max them out, but they were enough for what I needed right now. I made my way back home one final time, taking a few minutes to get equipped just like before. Last time, my battle with the blazes, if you could even call it that, was just a few minutes of hit and run tactics. I kept watching my health dip lower and lower, and frankly it diminished the little bit of confidence that I had gained from my first mining trip. This time, though, I knew I would be safe. I was geared up in full diamond armor with a shiny new diamond sword. This time, I would sever every rod from those blazes' bodies. I wasted no time in making my way to the Nether, down the tunnel, and into the fortress. With my gleaming enchanted sword in hand, I swung at the blazes, and in my eagerness, I completely forgot about Sweeping Edge, and I managed to damage a zombie pigman. Thankfully, since I was in a tunnel, I could just keep backing up and killing them as they came and attacked me. Their onslaught lasted much longer than I would have liked, but eventually I did manage to get all of them off of me. With the piglins defeated, I finally headed back into the spawner to start getting blaze rods. In the end, I fought blazes for less than 10 minutes, but I walked out of that fortress with a massive 16 blaze rods to my name. I returned home with my head held high, knowing that with that, I had won. I was filled with confidence and pride in my ability. This was my first time ever going to a fortress alone and making it out without a single death. In fact, I don't believe my health ever dipped below 7 hearts. With that, I knew I was ready. I had only one objective left. I was going to find the stronghold, and I was going to defeat the Ender Dragon.